When we say, like father, like son, we usually mean the son is acting just like his father. Normally, a father would take great comfort in having a son just like himself. Taken this way, Saul, the founding king of Israel, had no consolation all his life. Why then did King Saul's son not want to be like him? When God's people returned from slavery in Egypt to the promised land of Canaan, for the first 400 years there was no king to rule over them, but God's chosen judges led them. By the end of Samuel's time as judge, the people of God, dissatisfied with Samuel's sons, demanded that a king be appointed to rule them just like the Gentile nations. Samuel went to inquire of the Lord God about this matter, and the Lord told him, as recorded in 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 7, "Listen to all the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king." With God's permission, Samuel followed God's lead to find Saul and anointed him as the first king of Israel. In 1 Samuel chapter 9, verse 2, Saul is described as handsome a young man as could be found anywhere in Israel, and he was a head taller than anyone else. Saul was so handsome in appearance that it was no wonder that when Samuel later formally introduced him, the people of Israel were so pleased that they shouted, "Long live the king!" As for Saul himself, he was not mentally prepared to be king, and he had gone to Samuel only to find out where to find their lost donkey. In addition, Saul belonged to the tribe of Benjamin, the smallest of the 12 tribes of Israel. Therefore, Saul's initial behavior was very humble. When Samuel brought him out to be a king in front of all the people, he hid himself. After Saul ascended the throne, in the early stage of his governance of the country, he had many commendable heroic deeds. He also showed great generosity to those who despised him. It is a pity that he later began to do things that displeased God. In 1 Samuel chapter 13, the Philistines gathered to fight against the Israelites. The Philistines had 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen, and the foot soldiers were as numerous as the sand on the seashore. The Israelites were frightened. Some hid and others fled. Saul and his men waited at Gilgal for Samuel to come and offer sacrifices to God. But Samuel did not come after 7 days, and Saul's men began to leave. In desperation, King Saul overstepped his authority and offered the burnt offering. As soon as he had finished offering the sacrifice, Samuel arrived. When Samuel rebuked him, King Saul gave him the reasons, including, first, the people had left him. Second, Samuel did not come at the appointed time. And third, he was afraid that the Philistines would attack them before they could offer sacrifices to the Lord, and then they would be defeated. Finally, King Saul declared that he felt compelled to offer the burnt offering. Wow, it's always someone else's fault. But Samuel bluntly pointed out, "You have done a foolish thing," Samuel said. "You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you, but now your kingdom will not endure." In other words, it was King Saul himself who had really sinned against God. King Saul did not obey God's command. In addition to showing disrespect to Samuel, who was also the high priest at the time, and his priesthood, King Saul did not follow God's command to destroy the Amalekites, who had bullied God's people. When Samuel came to question him, King Saul answered with a high-sounding voice, "The soldiers brought them from the Amalekites. They spared the best of the sheep and cattle to sacrifice to the Lord your God, but we totally destroyed the rest." 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 15. Again, somebody else's fault. Because King Saul repeatedly failed God, the Spirit of God left him, and King Saul was then often disturbed by the evil spirits of the spiritual world. In the meantime, a young man named David, who was good at playing the harp, was brought before King Saul to play the harp for him to remove the disturbance. King Saul initially admired David and was not wary of him. One day, when the Philistines came to challenge the Israelites, David went to the battlefield to visit his brothers. He struck Goliath, the Philistine giant, on the forehead with a stone and then killed him with a knife, thus giving Israel victory. Afterward, the women of Israel sang and danced, "Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands." 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 7. This displeased King Saul greatly, and from that point on he became jealous and hostile toward David, and later even sought to kill him. Without God's protection, David would have died much earlier. No one would have guessed that the key person God had arranged to protect David would be Jonathan, King Saul's eldest son. Jonathan was not stubborn like his father Saul. He was not only valiant, but he was also wise, especially spiritually wise. Jonathan knew David was God's chosen man after God's own heart, so he made an alliance with David and assisted David in his escape. When King Saul found out David received help from Amalekite, the priest of Nob, where he was on the run, he ordered 85 priests to be killed, as well as all the people and livestock in the city of priests. This added to the long list of King Saul's sins against God. After Samuel's death, the Philistines gathered again to fight against the Israelites. King Saul's heart trembled with terror. King Saul went to ask God if he would prevail and help him, but there was no answer from God. In his distress, King Saul disguised himself with common clothing and went to see a woman who claimed to be able to contact the dead and spirit beings. Well, of course, people like her who say they deal with ghosts and evil spirits deceive people. It was impossible for her to summon Samuel. However, at this time, God allowed Samuel to appear and to give King Saul a final warning. Samuel said to King Saul, "The Lord will deliver both Israel and you into the hands of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons will be with me." That's 1 Samuel chapter 28, verse 19. The prophecy Samuel gave at that time was later completely fulfilled. King Saul and his 3 sons, Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua, died in the battle on the same day. Ishbosheth, another son of King Saul, became king over Israel. However, 2 years later, he too was assassinated. King Saul had 2 daughters, Merab and Michal. King Saul had recruited David to be his son-in-law and asked him to kill 100 Philistines as his dowry, thinking that he might put David to death by the sword of the Philistines. However, Saul did not succeed, and David succeeded in marrying Michal, who protected him from being killed by her father. Later, when David was in exile, King Saul married Michal to another man. After David ascended the throne, he had Michal returned to him, but Michal despised the fervent displays of King David's worship and praise of God. So she was not favored by King David, nor was she able to bear any children. Looking back on the house of King Saul makes us feel sorry. King Saul was a fine man, and he had such a fine son. He kept saying to himself, "Do this for God and do that for God." Why did God not approve of him? The answer lies in Samuel's words to him. Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 22. Today, like King Saul, we may love and serve God in a self-righteous way, but it's only in vain. Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 10 says, "Find out what pleases the Lord. And let us learn then to seek God's will with reverence and to do it accordingly. Then it will be acceptable to Him."